Arai Guma by Marc Yamaguchi. Chapter 3, Rachel, Part 2. Rose lunged and bit down hard on the tail of Rachel's father, who shrieked in pain, but she could think of no other way to stop him in his tracks. He had left a wake of destruction in their carefully planned nursing area, all the while uttering yellow caterpillar this, caterpillar that. With her teeth still clenched tight around Rachel's father's tail, Rose screeched, "Enough!" which echoed throughout their hollow tree. Rose let go, and the couple sat motionless, with only the sound of Rachel's father's blood dripping from his tail onto the leaf cover. The story of how Rachel was born a city girl always began with Rose making light of her father's madness from foraging mushrooms. Rose would later concede her husband had been right to uproot and give birth to Rachel and her brothers in the city. Rose didn't want to believe the gift of life came from a hawk's mercy. That hawk was the harbinger of very difficult times ahead, so Rose liked to blame the hawk for her and her husband's ensuing irreconcilable differences. Her cognitive dissonance was thin disguise for her misery at the rapidly changing landscape, and an environment fast becoming inhospitable to the original inhabitants. It turned out the yellow caterpillars the hawk spoke of metamorphosed into agents of death. Paradise was lost the moment Rachel's father could explain what he had seen, butchery of everything he had known, and on a scale unimaginable. The diesel exhaust could be smelt miles away, and the rising sawdust from tattered trees could be seen above the diminishing canopy. There were the horrific sounds of terror, altogether out of tune, which created a confusing image in Rachel's father's mind until he saw what was causing the earth to pulsate beneath his paws. Once the chaos of fleeing animals and insects had died down, Rachel's father furtively made his way to the flank of something that had passed through with utter destruction. The remaining flora was shaking rhythmically as Rachel's father carefully took a peek at the carnage. He almost drew attention to himself when he mistakenly called out to what he thought was the hawk. But this turkey vulture was signaling to his kin he had hit the bloody jackpot. Rachel's father was horrified to see among the dead a small number of coyotes, shot and subsequently driven into the ground by the yellow caterpillars, bulldozers that did not discriminate in their war on the forest nor its very rattled inhabitants. Rachel's father was rattled indeed. Rose had never seen him worked up to such a degree. He shed tears as he explained what he had experienced and feared they would be next, buried alongside the very things that used to keep them up at night. "We've to pack up and head for the city at once." Rachel's father was doing calculations out loud as Rose struggled to understand what he was proposing. 2 months? No, 1 month. By 2 weeks. That's it. We've got to. Rose interrupted his frantic stuttering and looked him in the eyes. "What's gotten into you? I'm the one who should be stressed. I'm the pregnant one here." The city was considered a mythical place, and those who broke with the countryside chased a dream that had to result in tragedy. Rose was really annoyed he was going on this way about the city. Was this a bad joke? Cut me pretty bad on my back here, but instead of trying to end my life, he stopped suddenly and said he felt sorry for our kind. Rachel's father regained his composure as he spoke at length. "This hawk wouldn't let me leave his kill zone without first warning me that these yellow caterpillars would be the end of us if we stayed to watch their approach." Rose was beginning to connect the dots. Something about caterpillars being confused with great misfortune and extinction in the mind of her husband. Was he going daft? In the first place, it was ludicrous to think he was talking with a hawk. If anything, he must have meant an owl. Maybe if he got more oxygen, he would come to his senses. The yellow caterpillars flushed out his prey in unprecedented numbers, but the hawk wanted me to know we'd only survive if we moved to a different kind of forest, a land which has very tall, gray, hardened trees. He wanted our kind to survive only because he respected the food chain. At this, Rachel's father let out a giant sigh and winced as he sat down on his hindquarters. The wound on his back from the hawk was still fresh, and as he curled up his tail, the matted fur pulled at the gash he got from Rose. It was Rose's turn to talk. Let's say you had a word or two with this known silent killer. What makes you think a pregnant raccoon would leave the comfort of her home, travel with nothing but the babies in her womb? It was a stroke of luck that her litter would only result in 3 pups. Traverse the kill zones of our enemies in order to reach the promised land our friend, the hawk, calls the city. When Rose made a point, she unashamedly stepped onto her soapbox so nobody could get in a word edgewise. This night was different, however, and Rachel's father wouldn't give in until she agreed to come with him to see the desolation of the yellow caterpillars. When Rachel, Ricky, and Ray heard stories about their parents' past, it wasn't clear what made their parents sadder: the yellow caterpillars' desecration of the countryside, or that they personally had been forced from their home by the yellow caterpillars. On the extremely rare occasion, Rachel saw her father win an argument, like when Rose backed down on Rachel's punishment for foolishly exposing herself to a red-tailed hawk. Hawks had foresight, Rose was forced to admit. In fact, Rachel could only remember one other instance when her father exasperated her mother in conversation. This was his decision to join a growing legion of city raccoons who had banded together to solve the green wheelie problem. Since they had arrived in the city, Rose had been on Rachel's father's case concerning their dwindling stores of food. Rachel's father reminded Rose that their chances of surviving in the city were still significantly better than returning to the countryside to negotiate with the yellow caterpillars. But Rachel's father could never have predicted the green wheelie conundrum that was indiscriminately starving populations of city raccoons. One day, some rival factions decided to forgo their differences and teamed up to solve this existential crisis created by the Walkies. The Walkies never fought fair. They stood upright, which gave them the upper hand, and the use of one's hands bestowed an advantage over other earthlings. In truth, Rachel's father had been struggling for some time to adapt to the new conditions of city life. As luck would have it, Rachel's father was recruited to help fatten the ranks of a raccoon gang in need of his girth. A large-sized raccoon projected an image of prosperity and wealth, and the gang's leader, Severn, equated wealth with power. Severn had great ambitions, but was of average size, so he would need enforcers on his quest to acquire resources and establish an economy he envisioned to be his coronation. For Severn's growing pack of raccoons, the perception of strength was extremely important. Hunger could be either a threat to his new order or an asset, should he be able to manipulate the desperation of his followers. Severn had rallied troops to beat the Walkies at their game of starving him and his followers. Severn found the Walkies in contempt of senseless waste. Evidently, one being's junk was another's treasure. Ambition is born from envy, and the Walkies' largesse made Severn as green with envy as the newly impregnable green bins. If it had served Severn's purposes, Rachel's father could have been called to scratch out the eyes of those Walkies, who routinely came to his territory and took away the refuse that should have fortified his expanding army.